So let's get started with the Telltale Heart, and this is going to be part 2 of the story. So let's review a little bit about what we learned about the Telltale Heart. This is a short story by a man named Edgar Allen Poe, and he wrote this story and published it in 1843. Whew. So this is a really old story, and it's a classic. In the United States, almost everyone knows about this story. And most students in American schools will read the story when you're in school. Most students in school read it in school. What kind of sentence is that? Crazy Kyle. But the Telltale Heart is about this character who says he's not crazy, but then he says, I'm not crazy, but I want to kill the old man I live with. Ugh, maybe he's a little bit crazy. And then he says, I like to watch the old man sleep. Sounding a little bit crazy. Every night, I stick my lantern in the room and watch the old man sleep because he has a creepy eye. Maybe a little bit crazy. Okay, so this story is about this character who is a little bit crazy, but he says he's not. He says he's very smart and clever. And let's just review what the title means. The title is The Telltale Heart. You know what a heart is, right? In your chest. It goes boom, 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 boom. And telltale means that it's an adjective, and it means that someone or something is telling a story, or maybe telling a secret. So the telltale heart. The heart is telling a secret or telling a story. What could that mean? Well, we'll find out later in the story. But let's review what's going on a little bit more, and then we'll get to some new stuff. So at the beginning of the story, the man says he's nervous, and he says, oh, people think I'm mad. Mad means crazy. In America, mad usually means angry, but in England, people still use mad to mean crazy. Okay? But if you read an old story like this, they might use the word mad in the British way, meaning crazy. So he says he has a disease. He has some sort of sickness. And he thinks, it didn't make me crazy, it made me smarter. And then he says that he had an idea where he wants to kill the old man who he lives with, because the old man has an eye that's a little bit creepy, a little bit scary looking. So he says that the eye looks like a vulture's eye. The vulture is this kind of bird, and it's a pale blue eye with a film over it, meaning his eye is a like whitish blue with a film, meaning it looks like there's a cover on it. Sometimes when people get old, they have eye problems, but the main character thinks it's creepy enough that he wants to kill him. Very scary. Okay. And then we learned about what the main character is doing. He is sneaking into the old man's room and opening the door, putting a lantern in the door, opening the lantern so that the light shines on the old man's creepy eye, the blue eye. And he does this again and again and again. And he says that he's been doing it every night at 12 o'clock at night. I think he said it was for a week. He did it every night. So definitely not crazy, right? I don't know. So let's keep going with our story. I was thinking about reading the beginning again, but I think to save time, we can just get to the new parts, okay? So we can read from this page. So what was just happening? So he said that he was very quiet and careful, and that the old man would never think anything's wrong. Okay? So he did this for a week, so 7 nights. And then our character says, upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. So very slowly. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. Ooh. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with a thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened, through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and kept pushing it on, steadily, steadily. Okay, let's go through this slowly. So, upon the 8th night. Upon is just another way to say on. So, on the 8th night. Upon the 8th night. It's just a more formal way to say it. I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. So every night he opens the door. This time, he was more than usually cautious. Remember what cautious means? Cautious is another way to say careful. So he's being very careful when he opens the door. And he's more than usually cautious. Now, this is not super common these days. Usually we just say, oops, sorry, I hit the microphone. More than usual. The phrase more than usual is very common, and we put it at the end of a sentence. But here he's using more than usually to describe how cautious he is. Okay? So he's usually cautious, but now he's more than usually cautious, meaning he's being more careful than he usually is. It's more than usual. Okay? So this is a good phrase to know. More than usual. Like in here it says more than usually cautious. In regular talking, you might say he was careful. More than usual. Like you put it at the end, kind of. Okay? Or use it as a separate thing. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. So on a watch, like this, there are 3 hands, actually. There's an hour hand, a minute hand, and a second hand. So the watch's minute hand, meaning the long one that only moves a little bit each minute. So a watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. So how quickly does a watch's minute hand move? Well, very slowly. And that moves more quickly than his hand. So that means his hand was super slow. That makes sense? So he's comparing a watch's minute hand to his hand opening the door, showing that he's super careful. Continue. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. Okay. So never before that night, meaning this was the first time. Before that night, it never happened. So never before. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers. The word extent is kind of like how much. So he never felt how much power he had before this time. So he's trying to say that when he's opening the door really slowly, he feels really strong and powerful. Okay? We can use the extent of saying how much of that thing. So never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, meaning he never felt how much power he really had. Then of my sagacity. This word is a word you don't need to learn. This is a very, very formal word that I'm not sure I've seen outside of this story. But sagacity means like how smart you are, how wise you are, how clever. Okay? So never before this night, he never felt this powerful and he never felt this smart and clever. Okay? And then what do you say next? I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. So this word scarcely is the same as barely or hardly. I think you've learned both of those. Barely. Oops, only one L. Hardly. Like only a tiny bit, almost nothing is what barely means. Like if I forget my money and my pockets are empty, I only have $2 in my pocket, I might say, oh, I barely have any money. So I almost have zero. You could say I scarcely have any money, meaning my money is close to zero. Okay? So scarcely is the same as barely or hardly, but it's not very common. Okay? But it's good to know, of course. So he says, I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. Contain means hold in. Okay? So he's trying to hold it in, keep it a secret. What is he trying to hold in? My feelings of triumph. Triumph is another word to say victory or winning. Victory or winning. So he feels like he's already winning. He feels like he's already amazing because he thinks he's awesome. He thinks he's so powerful and smart. Okay? So I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. So he could barely control his excitement about winning and succeeding and killing this old man. So he's being really scary as usual. He's opening the door and he's like, ha ha ha, I'm so smart. Pretty creepy. Okay, keep going. To think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. So, this is kind of an old way of writing. He not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. Here, he not even to is not common anymore. But what this means is like he didn't even. He not even to is like he didn't even. I'm trying to. So he not even to dream of means he didn't even dream of my secret deeds. So this old man is sleeping and he's not even thinking about the main character doing anything. Now, secret deeds. A deed is like a job, something you need to do. Something you need to do is a deed. Or just something you do. Like a mission is a deed, kind of. And so the main character has secret deeds. So he has secret things he did. Okay? Like looking in the door. And secret thoughts. So thinking about killing the guy is a secret thought, secret idea. So the old man is sleeping, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. Meaning that the old man didn't even dream about these scary things that are happening. Okay? And so our main character is very confident. Then continue. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. So, I fairly chuckled at the idea. We don't really use this word fairly anymore, or not this way. This means like lightly. I lightly chuckled. What is a chuckle? This is a good word to know. A chuckle is like a small laugh. Hoo 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 hoo. Might be a chuckle. Not a big laugh like ha ha ha, but a chuckle is a small laugh. Okay? So if someone tells you a joke, you could say, oh, I chuckled at my friend's joke. Okay? So our main character says, I fairly chuckled at the idea. So he's laughing at the idea of the old man not knowing what's going on. And perhaps he heard me. Perhaps is the same as maybe, right? Perhaps he heard me. Maybe he heard me chuckle. For he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Startled is like surprised. Surprised, but usually in a bad way. Surprised in a bad way. Okay? So the main character laughs a little bit. He chuckles. Hoo, hoo, hoo. And then here, the old man gets startled. But it's okay. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. Here when he says drew back, here the word drew means pulled back. So you may think that I drew back, like pulled away from the door. Like, so if the old man gets scared, you would think, oh, he should back away because he doesn't want to get caught. But no, the main character says, no, I didn't step away. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness. So the room was completely black. Here they say black as pitch, but usually we say pitch black. Black as pitch is an old way to say it. Pitch black is what people say now, which means completely black, all black, no light at all. That's because pitch is something a little bit like oil that people used to use for letters, I think. And it was very, very, very black, like super dark black. So if you say pitch black, that means there's no light at all. Okay? Like the room was pitch black. Okay? So his room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness. For the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers. Shutters are things you put that are on windows. They are like little doors on the window and they shut. So they're called shutters. The shutters were close fastened. Fastened means kind of like locked or closed or tied up. let's say it's locked here. They were close fastened, meaning tightly closed. So the shutters on the window were tightly closed. So it was very, very dark. No light could come in. The shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers. Meaning they closed the windows really tight because there was fear of robbers. A robber is a thief, okay? So they're afraid someone will come in the window and steal things, so they lock the windows. And because of that, it's really dark in the room. It's pitch black, okay? And so the main character said, "And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door. And I kept pushing it on, steadily, steadily." So the room is so dark, the main character knows he could not see the opening of the door. And I kept on pushing it on, steadily, steadily. So the main character is still pushing the door, steadily. Steadily is like not slowing down, not going faster, just keeping it the same. So steady means keeping something the same, or doing it the same way. So he's pushing the door open. He doesn't go faster. He doesn't go slower. He just keeps it steady. He's pushing it steadily. Okay? Okay, let's keep on moving. Or should I read it one more time? Let's do that. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds and thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea. And perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with a thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers. So I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on, steadily, steadily. Okay, pretty creepy, right? Okay, let's keep going. Okay, now he's pushing the door. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening. Ding! And the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" Okay, so let's do this piece by piece. So I had my head in. Remember, he puts his head through the doorway, and then he puts the lantern through the doorway. So I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening. His thumb, your thumb is your big finger. Well, technically it's not a finger, it's a thumb. So your thumb is this thing. So his thumb slipped. It went zoop. It slipped upon the tin fastening. We just saw the word fastened for the windows. The windows were fastened closed, right? So a fastening is like a lock, or maybe a lock or a clasp. It's a little piece of metal that keeps the door closed. So on the lantern, there's a little door. His thumb slipped on the tin fastening. Oh, sorry, tin. I didn't say what tin is. Tin is a kind of metal. It's a really light metal. So His thumb is touching the lantern and it touches the metal and it slips a little and it goes ding. Maybe it makes a little sound. So, I was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening. Shoop, ding! And the old man sprang up in bed. To sprang up is the past tense of spring up. A spring is a thing that can bounce. Boing, boing, boing. It's made of metal, and the metal goes around and around. And it goes up and down. Boing, boing. You might have springs in your bed. So if you push a spring down, it will go boing and bounce up really fast. So you could say for a person, if they spring up, it means they jump up. Okay? So the old man sprang up in bed. He jumped up, crying out, "Who's there?" Now be careful here, cry or crying out does not mean boo-hoo-hoo, not that crying. Crying can also mean to shout. To cry out is like, hey, you can shout out, okay? So crying out, "Who's there?" So the old man heard the sound and now he's scared. But he can't see anything because it's pitch black in the room, right? And what happens next? I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle. And in the meantime, I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Okay, so the old man jumps up and says, "Who's there?" He's sitting in the dark. And then, I kept quite still and said nothing. Still means not moving. So the main character is holding the lantern, just standing still. Okay? In the dark. So he's not moving. For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle. Okay, a whole hour, so 60 minutes, he's standing in the dark with his lantern like this. For an hour. And he says, I did not move a muscle. This is a common phrase. I didn't move a muscle. Or you could tell a kid, don't move a muscle. Meaning, stay completely still. Or don't move at all. So don't move a muscle. If you have a dog and you want your dog to sit, you could say, sit, don't move a muscle. And your dog goes like this. Okay? So our main character is standing there for an hour like this. Not moving. In the meantime, meaning at the same time, I did not hear him lie down. So the main character is here. The old man is sitting scared. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done night after night. So in the same way, they're listening to each other. Hearkening to the death watches in the wall, meaning that the main character every night is listening to death in the wall. So the main character says, just as I have done night after night, meaning he's listening night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Last time we said that hearkening is kind of like calling to something. So he's calling to the death watches in the wall, meaning like he's calling to the gods of death to come help him kill the old man. Something like that. Okay. Oh, creepy, right? Let's keep going. So they're both in silence, in the dark, being very creepy. And presently, oh, did we reread it? Do you want to? Okay, let's do it one more time since we went over the words. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening. Ding! And the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Okay, next. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and I pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. So, this one's a little bit tricky. So, presently, meaning at that time, you know the word present, or at that moment. Okay? This is not very common in books anymore to use presently like this. Come on. At that time. So, or right then. You could say that, right then. When we say presently now, in modern times, presently means right now. So presently, I'm sitting in a chair. Okay? He's telling a story about the past of what already happened. So then in this situation, it means at that time. Okay? So, presently, I heard a slight groan. A groan is that kind of sound. People make groans when they are sick, or they make a groan sound when they are uncomfortable. It's a low, long sound. So this old man made a groan, a slight groan. Slight means little. So he goes, so a little sound. And I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. Mortal terror means, well, terror means fear. Mortal is your life, so mortal terror is fear for your life. Like you think you're going to die. So terror is fear. Mortal means it's about life. Okay? So terror is a common word. Mortal terror is a little bit less common, but mortal is, you'll hear that and it's talking about life, okay? Or things that are alive, okay? So the old man made a groan, and it's a groan of terror. He's scared, okay? It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. Now, this is tricky. It was the low, meaning low sound, like woo, and a stifled sound. When something is stifled, that means it's like pushed down. Maybe he might go, ah, but it's stifled, so he pushes the sound down. Okay? So stifled means you're like controlling something. The low stifled sound that arises or comes up from the bottom of the soul. Your soul is your spirit. The idea that every person has a spirit, like a ghost inside them, that's your soul. And if you pass away, your soul might go to heaven or something like that. Okay? So this sound comes from the bottom of the soul. So deep down in you, when overcharged with awe. Overcharged means filled with too much awe. So overcharges means it's filled with too much, overfilled. And what is it? What is his soul filled with? His soul is filled with awe. Awe means feeling like something's incredible, like a feeling that something is incredible. Now, this could be, usually this is a good thing, but in this story, it's a bad thing. It's saying that something is like shocking or incredible. Something that makes you go, oh. That's kind of what awe means. Awe means that it makes you feel shocked or surprised. It's something that makes you open your eyes wide. So, this old man made a groan, which is from terror. So he's really afraid because he's filled with awe. Like, oh, like this feeling that something crazy is happening. Okay? The main character says, I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom. So, it, meaning the groan, this sound, ooh, has welled up from my own bosom. Welled up means came up. Okay? For my own bosom, your bosom is your chest. So the sound came from his chest. Ooh. Okay? This section is a little bit tricky. So if this is hard for you, don't worry. It's not super important. He's describing a sound. Okay? It is welled up from my own bosom, meaning the sound came from my own chest. Deepening, getting deeper, woo, with this dreadful echo. Dreadful means terrible. And echo means the sound goes and comes back, like huiyin. So there's an echo. When you groan like this, ooh, it bounces off the walls and it's dreadful, meaning it's terrible and scary. Okay? Dreadful means terrible. Oops. Like really awful. Okay? The terrors that distracted me. So this is the reason the main character was groaning. The terrors that distracted me. So a terror means something scary. And it distracted him. It means he couldn't pay attention. Distracted is a good word. You might know this already. Make someone lose focus. If something distracts you, it makes you lose focus. Like if you're trying to read a book and something distracts you, you're reading and it distracts you. It makes you lose focus on the book. Okay. And then let's keep going. I want to get past this groan part. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and I pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. So the old man made a groan. Ugh. The main character says he made that sound before too. He understands being afraid. Okay? So I knew what the old man felt and pitied him. This word is pity. To pity someone means to feel bad for them. Like, if someone gets hurt and breaks their arm, ouch, you might say, oh, or I feel pity for that guy. Meaning, like, I feel bad that that happened to him. Be careful with this word. Sometimes it can be negative. Like, it might sound like you think you're better than someone. So be careful about pity. Okay? So I pitied him, meaning he felt bad for the old man. Although I chuckled at heart. So he feels bad for him, but in his heart, he's chuckling. Do you remember what chuckle means? It's a little laugh. Hoo, 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 hoo. So he feels kind of bad, but he's still laughing. Hoo, 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 hoo. Okay. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. So the main character knows the old man has been sitting there awake for a long time. It's been an hour, right? His fears had been ever since growing upon him. So the old man, his fears, meaning his being scared, his feelings of fear, had been ever since growing upon him. So he was afraid at the first sound, but now it's been an hour of silence, and his fear, being afraid, is getting worse and worse, and he's getting more and more scared. So his fears had been ever since, meaning since that time, since the first noise. So his fears had been growing upon him since that first sound. So he's afraid, and he's getting more and more afraid until he makes a sound. So he made a sound because he's so scared. Okay? I hope this is not too creepy for all of you. It's kind of creepy for me. Okay. Next up. Oh, let's read it one more time. I keep forgetting. So, presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no, it was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. Oh. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it had welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo. Oh, the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and I pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. Hoo, hoo, hoo. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. What was that? His fears had been ever since growing upon him. Oh, it's getting worse and worse and more scary. Okay, keep on going. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "Oh, it is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor," or "It is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he has been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. Okay. So, still tricky, but a little bit less tricky than the last part. So, he had been trying to fancy them causeless. So, he's talking about the fear. The them is the man's fear. Okay, so the them is the fears. He's afraid of something, he doesn't know what. Okay, so he had been trying to fancy them causeless. This is a very old way to use the word fancy. Here, it means think of, or think about something. And causeless, meaning having no cause or no reason. So what does this mean? He's afraid, but he doesn't know why. So he had been trying to fancy them causeless. He was trying to think of his fears and think that they have no reason. It's like, oh, I'm afraid of nothing. Oh, sorry, I'm on the edge of the line, sorry. So he's thinking about why does he feel afraid? And he's trying to tell himself, oh, it's okay, there must be nothing. So he'd been trying to think of his fears as being causeless. There's no reason to be afraid, but could not. It's not working. He's still afraid. He had been saying to himself, oh, it is nothing but the wind in the chimney. A chimney is a long, tall thing in a house where smoke will go in the chimney and out of the house. So in homes, in a house, you might have a chimney where you burn a fire and the smoke goes up the chimney and out of the house. So the old man says, it is nothing but wind in the chimney. So he heard a sound and he's saying, oh, it's just wind that's over in the chimney in that place. Okay? So he's trying to tell himself, don't need to be scared. It is only a mouse crossing the floor. He heard a sound. Oh, it must have been just a mouse. Okay? Or it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp. A cricket is a little green insect, a green bug that can jump really far. Boing. You can also call them grasshoppers. Crickets and grasshoppers are a little bit different, but they're almost the same. But what they do is they rub their feet together and they make a sound. They go ee, 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 or make a chirp. So one sound, ee, is a chirp. So it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp. So maybe it's a bug that made one sound. Yes, he has been trying to comfort himself with all these suppositions. So he's trying to comfort himself. To comfort someone means make them feel better. So he's telling himself, oh, it's just a mouse, just to make himself feel better because he's scared, right? So he has been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions. Supposition is not a common word. It's an old word. Use red to show you don't need to study it. But you might know the word suppose. I suppose that it will be nice tomorrow. Suppose is kind of like I believe or I think or something this is probably true. Okay? So a supposition is something that he supposes is true. Something that he thinks might be true. Okay? So he tried to comfort himself, but he had found all in vain. In vain is a phrase that means useless. This is not common, but not rare. So it's worth studying. It's good to study. In vain means worthless. It didn't work. So he tried to comfort himself, but it was all in vain. It was a waste of time. That's another. A waste of time. Okay. And all in vain. So it's all a waste of time. Because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. So death, with a capital D, is the god of death. You can imagine a skeleton wearing a black hood on his head. That's death. Okay? So death, in approaching him, so when coming to the old man, had stalked with his black shadow before him. To stalk someone means to follow someone in a bad way, follow in a scary way. So the god of death is following the old man with his black shadow before him. So the death comes at him with a shadow in front of the god of death and enveloped the victim. So the word enveloped is like to cover something. So the shadow of the god of death covered the old man in all black. Okay. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow. Oh my God. So mournful is a fancy word to say sad. So a very sad influence, the very sad feeling. Okay. It was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow. Perceive means to see something or know it's there. Like I can perceive the light in my room. You can see it. If something's unperceived, you can't see it, you can't hear it, you don't know it's there. Okay? So the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow. So there's this sad feeling he gets from this shadow he can't even see that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard. So that's why it's unperceived. He didn't see it or hear it. To feel the presence of my head within the room. So the man's head is in the room watching him. And the old man can feel that the main character's head is in the room. He can't see it. It's unperceived. But he feels like something's bad, something's going on. And so I think we can stop here for now. Next time, we can continue on with what happens when the old man has a feeling something's wrong. Oh, let's reread this last section because we just went over it, right? He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor," or "It is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Chirp. Yes, he has been trying to comfort himself with all these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him. and enveloped the victim. Ha ha ha. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. So the old man can feel that the main character is there with his head in his lantern, but he can't see him and he can't hear him, but he feels nervous and scared. So let's stop here for today. We're getting closer to something crazy and creepy happening, right? And do you feel like our main character is still a clever, normal guy? I don't think so. He stood still holding that lantern in the black for an hour. So he must be a crazy guy, right? So next time we'll see what happens. The old man is sitting up. The old man is scared. The main character's standing in the dark. So what happens next? Will the old man do something? Or will the main character do something? Who will move first? So that's it for part 2 of The Telltale Heart. Next time we can continue on and move forward in the story. And there's a lot to learn. This is a difficult story, so if there are lots of vocabulary words, don't worry about it. The words that I put yellow underneath are useful words that are good to learn. The ones that I put red under are super hard words that you don't need to know. People don't usually use them anymore. But yeah, I think this is a fun, interesting way to practice our English. There's a lot of difficult English and difficult words. So if this is hard for you, that's okay. Don't feel bad. I want to do this as a challenge to show you some tricky English and some tricky vocabulary. And this is a very famous story for Halloween, so it's a good choice. And also remember, it's a very old story, so the way it's written is an old way of writing, so that makes it even more tricky. So again, just try your best. Try to follow along. If you could try to read what we've read already to practice again and again. See what parts you think are easy or hard. And again, you can always leave me a message with a question if you want me to explain something more or give you an example or something like that. Okay? So thank you for joining. I hope you had a good time. I hope I didn't creep you out too much with this story. It's a little bit scary. And next time we'll see what happens when the old man and the man in the door are standing and listening for each other in the darkness. So thank you for joining, and I'll see you next time. Okay? Bye-bye.